I am talking about withholding information, aka what's in the box, how to weaponize your reader's imagination when you're writing horror. Because while a lot of writing is show, don't tell, sometimes it's good to neither show and or not tell. So to start on the most cliche note, what is horror? By definition, it is a painful and intense fear, dread, or dismay, intense aversion or repulsion, and the quality of inspiring horror, repulsive, horrible, or dismal quality or character. So, of course, I had to include the scariest thing ever, a werewolf bar mitzvah. Um, Now, when writers write, how do they evoke horror? And there's a lot of different tools you can use in your writing. One I kind of already mentioned briefly when we were chatting earlier, and that's using tension and pacing. Horror is all about creating tension and breaking it at the right moment. So, for example, if you have a character who's being chased by a serial killer with a knife and they're hiding in a room and trying not to draw attention. The tension is, drawing it out, slowing the moment down so that every heartbeat, every step that they hear, every breath they take is magnified and intensified so that as they hear footsteps creeping closer, as they, feel themselves maybe bleeding from a stab wound, it all compounds and builds to that moment where either they are found or the killer moves on. That's the break in the tension. Um, Another tool authors can use is heightened emotions, really putting your readers within the character's skin, making them feel everything, whether, they feel their heart rate speed up as they're hiding out, whether they have to bite their tongue and they taste the copper in their mouth to keep from screaming. Every single thought and process, you can really draw that out and kind of add on to the previous thing about pacing, really slow things down, linger in the moment, linger in the discomfort to create a response from the reader. Another tool authors can use is vivid description, kind of like what I said, biting your tongue and tasting copper, or feeling sweat start to drip down your back, or blood drip down your leg. Like really highlighting that sensory detail is a way to build that tension, create that horror moment until something has to happen to break it. But one tool that I think is overlooked a fair amount is what I refer to as misdirection, or looking away, not showing, not revealing that break in the tension in a way that can be very effective, and where you actually use your reader's imagination to fill in the gaps. You line up the dominoes, as I describe it, with the buildup of the scene, the buildup of tension, and then you cut it off right at the end and let the reader fill in the blanks themselves. And that can sometimes be even more effective or more horrific than going into detail and describing a scene. Now, what is misdirection? It's an actor instance of misdirecting or diverting, which, thanks Merriam-Webster, that is very obvious definition. But in writing, that can manifest as turning the focus of the narrative, or the lens, if you will, away just as something horrific happens, averting the reader's eyes. And what are some ways that writers can do that in text? Because in film, that's very easy. You literally turn the camera. But when you're writing a book, you don't necessarily have that same ability. So sometimes that can be, cutting a scene, whether it's having a line break or a scene break, or sometimes even a chapter break. So, for example, you've got that character hiding from a serial killer, and you build up the tension. You show that time dilation, that they're, counting their heartbeats. They're listening to every creak in the floorboards. They're trying not to whimper in pain as they're hiding and drawing attention. And then that break in the tension is they see the doorknob turn. And if you cut it right there, the reader can, connect the dots themselves and figure out, okay, that person's dead. And you go to the next scene. Another way to do it is a time skip, the same kind of thing. You build up, you show the doorknob turning, you cut there, and then you jump to maybe the morning after, and another character is finding the remains, as you will. Another way to misdirect is using brevity. You don't have to go into graphic details. Sometimes less can hit so much harder. And you don't need the visceral description necessarily if you want to keep it short and sweet and let the reader connect the dots with what actually happened. If you're writing in first person, you can have a character literally shut their eyes. They're literally averting their gaze here. And that's a way where, you don't have to go into detail and describe what's happening visually, but you can describe maybe the sounds they're hearing, what they're feeling. And that's a way where you don't have to paint the picture in as much detail, but still convey the horror and let the reader connect the dots themselves and figure out what's going on. And then the last tool you can use as an author is focus on a reaction. And I will get into that in the next slide a bit, but essentially it's rather than showing something horrific, you avert the reader's gaze, you turn the lens, and you show how a character reacts to what they're seeing. And there's some pretty notable examples. Oop, there we go. So, some examples of misdirection and how it's been used to great effect to inspire horror that maybe the act of showing would have lessened the impact. And one very famously is the movie Rosemary's Baby from 1968. You've got this kind of build in tension throughout the film, and then towards the end of the film, Rosemary walks into her apartment, sees the cult around her baby, and at that scene she looks in the bassinet, and the film itself never shows the baby. We don't get to see what she's looking at. All we get is Mia Farrow's reaction and the horror and fear as she looks in the crib and how she turns away. As the audience, we don't need to know the exact details of what she's seeing. Her reaction is enough to really drive home the impact and let us connect the dots on just how bad it is to drive her insane. Another example of misdirection, less well known, but a movie I kind of stumbled on in the past week or two is a film called The Hitcher from 1986. Basically serial killer hitchhiker, but at a climactic moment in the film, one of the main characters is tied to the back of a semi-truck and a light pole, and the killer is in the cab of the car with his hand on the brake, and the hero is facing off, and the tension builds by how the focus of the scene alternates between the hero, the killer, and this girl tied up between the truck and the light pole in this tense situation where she has no idea. And the combination of, the focus jumping back and forth and being aware of every single minute motion that the characters are making and the build of tension of who's going to move first and who's going to, win in this face off, and her growing panic as she's trapped there tied up, that creates that build and that increase in horror over time. And then when, spoiler, the killer wins and he releases the brake and she is ripped in half, we don't actually see it. It immediately cuts to black in the film. We don't see anything, we don't hear anything. But because that tension had been built so successfully and the focus had, shifted between all three players in the scene, we as the audience know exactly what just happened, and we don't need to see anything in explicit, gory detail to feel that horror and despair at her death. And then, of course, probably the most memorable scene of misdirection is, of course, the What's in the Box scene from 1995's Seven, where over the course of the movie, the horror has been built, and as the audience, we have seen every other aftermath of this killer, leading up to this climactic scene at the end. And when the box arrives, we see Morgan Freeman's reaction to opening the box. We see the other character's reaction to him opening the box, but we never actually see what's in the box. And it works so successfully because some people have actually, their brains have created false memories that they have actually seen Gwyneth Paltrow's head in the box. If you look at the film, it's never actually shown. But because the tension has been built over the course of the movie so well, and because we focus so much on the character's reaction to opening the box, that the audience can immediately fill in the blank. There's no confusion. There's, no uncertainty. We all know exactly what's in the box. So, in conclusion, by averting the reader's eyes and just alluding to the horrific event, you make your reader an active participant in the storytelling, letting them fill in the blanks with their own imagination. And nothing's scarier than imagination. So yeah, that is misdirection in a couple minutes.